The journey is long and dangerous. You must be prepared for anything.
We understand. We are ready.
Two young Apache girls stumbled out of the wilderness, exhausted, hungry, and barely able to stand. Most people would have turned them away, but one lonely mountain cowboy opened his door without asking a single question. He gave them food, warmth, and a safe place to sleep. But just 3 days later, their mother appeared at his cabin with an offer so unexpected, so shocking, that it would change the cowboy's life forever. What she asked left an entire community speechless, and no one saw it coming. The first snow of winter had already settled across the high mountains when Ethan Walker guided his horse along a narrow trail overlooking the valley below. The air was cold enough to sting his face, and the sky carried the dull gray color that often promised another storm before nightfall. Ethan preferred the silence of the mountains. For nearly 8 years, he had lived alone in a small log cabin far from town. Most people believed he was simply a quiet man who liked his privacy. Few knew the real reason. Years earlier, Ethan had lost his wife, Sarah, and their young son during a severe winter illness that swept through the region. Since then, he had withdrawn from the world. His ranch was small, his needs were simple, and his conversations with others were rare. That afternoon, he had spent several hours checking fence lines and gathering supplies before heading home. His horse moved steadily through the snow-covered path while the wind whispered through the pine trees. As Ethan rounded a bend in the trail, something caught his attention. At first, he thought it was a deer moving between the trees. He pulled gently on the reins and narrowed his eyes. The shape appeared again, only this time it looked too small. He dismounted and stepped carefully through the snow. The closer he got, the more clearly he could see 2 figures huddled beneath a large pine tree. They were children. 2 girls sat pressed against each other, wrapped in thin blankets that offered little protection from the cold. Their faces were pale, and their clothes were torn from traveling through rough terrain. The older girl immediately stood and placed herself in front of the younger one. Fear filled her eyes. Ethan slowly raised his hands. "I am not going to hurt you," he said calmly. The girls exchanged nervous glances. The younger child shivered violently. Ethan noticed how thin they looked. They had not eaten properly in days. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. The older girl spoke softly. Her English was limited, but Ethan understood enough. They were sisters. They had become separated from their family during a storm several days earlier. Since then, they had been wandering through the mountains trying to find their way back. Ethan looked toward the darkening sky. Another storm was coming. If the girls remained outside overnight, they might not survive. He had no choice. "You can come with me," he said. The older girl hesitated. Trust was not easy to give in these mountains. Finally, after a long moment, she nodded. Ethan helped the younger girl onto his horse while the 3 of them began the slow journey to his cabin. Night had fallen by the time they arrived. Warm light glowed through the cabin windows. Inside, Ethan placed extra logs on the fire and prepared a pot of stew. The girls sat near the hearth, holding their hands toward the flames. For the first time since finding them, their frightened expressions began to soften. The younger sister smiled as she tasted the hot meal. It was a small smile, but Ethan noticed it. Something about seeing children in his home again stirred memories he had spent years trying to bury. Later that evening, after the girls had fallen asleep beneath thick wool blankets, Ethan stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted quietly from the sky. As he stood on the porch, staring into the darkness, he noticed something unusual. Fresh tracks crossed the snow near his cabin. They had not been there earlier. Someone else was moving through the mountains. And whoever it was seemed to be searching for something. Or someone. Ethan slept lightly that night. The tracks he had discovered outside his cabin remained on his mind long after he returned indoors. Whoever had passed through the area had been traveling on horseback, and the prints looked fresh. They could have belonged to a hunter, a ranch hand, or a traveler caught in the storm. Yet something about them left Ethan uneasy. At sunrise, he stepped outside to inspect them more closely. A fresh layer of snow had already begun covering the marks, but enough remained visible to tell him there had been at least 3 riders. They had passed near the cabin. Very near. Ethan followed the tracks for a short distance before they disappeared beneath drifting snow. When he returned inside, the girls were awake. The younger one, Nita, sat near the fireplace while her older sister, Tala, helped prepare breakfast. They seemed more comfortable than the day before, though caution still lingered in their eyes. Ethan placed a plate of food on the table. "You both slept well?" he asked. Tala nodded. "Better than many nights before." Her English was improving as she relaxed around him. Over the next few days, another storm swept across the mountains, making travel impossible. The cabin became a temporary shelter from the harsh weather outside. As the days passed, the girls slowly opened up. Nita loved asking questions. She wanted to know the names of Ethan's horses, where he had learned to hunt, and why he lived alone in the mountains. Children had a way of asking questions adults often avoided. One evening, while snow battered the cabin walls, Nita pointed toward a faded family photograph resting on a shelf. "Who are they?" The room grew quiet. Ethan looked at the picture. A woman with a warm smile stood beside a young boy who could not have been older than 7. "My family," he said softly. Nita sensed the sadness in his voice and asked nothing more. Tala, however, understood. "You miss them." Ethan stared into the fire. "Every day." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tala shared something of her own. She told Ethan about her mother, Ayana. According to Tala, Ayana was respected among many Apache families. People often sought her advice during difficult times. She was known for settling disputes and helping families survive harsh winters. The more Ethan listened, the more curious he became. "Your mother sounds like a strong woman." Tala smiled proudly. "She is stronger than anyone I know." Yet as she spoke, Ethan noticed concern in her expression. There was something she was not saying. Late the following afternoon, the answer arrived at his door. A loud knock echoed through the cabin. Ethan immediately reached for his rifle. The girls exchanged worried glances. When Ethan opened the door, 3 men stood outside beside their horses. At the front was Victor Kane. Everyone in the region knew Kane. He owned one of the largest ranches near town and carried himself like a man who expected obedience from everyone around him. His expensive coat and polished boots stood in sharp contrast to the snow-covered landscape. Kane glanced past Ethan into the cabin. His eyes settled on the girls. "There they are," he said. Tala instantly moved beside Nita. Ethan stepped into the doorway. "What do you want?" Kane forced a smile. "I heard you were sheltering a pair of lost children." "They are safe here. They belong with the authorities." Tala's face tightened. "No," she whispered. One of Kane's men dismounted and moved forward. Ethan blocked the entrance. The tension rose immediately. Kane's smile vanished. "You should think carefully before involving yourself in matters that do not concern you." "They concern me now," Ethan replied. For several seconds, neither man moved. Finally, Kane adjusted his gloves. "These mountains can be dangerous. Accidents happen all the time." The threat hung in the air. Then Kane turned toward his horse. Before leaving, he looked once more at the girls. A look that made Ethan's stomach tighten. The riders disappeared into the falling snow. Only after they were gone did Ethan close the door. Nita looked frightened. "Why does that man want us?" Tala lowered her eyes. She seemed to struggle with the decision to speak. Finally, she took a deep breath. "There is something you need to know." Ethan listened carefully. According to Tala, her mother possessed documents proving that several pieces of land had been taken illegally from both Apache families and struggling settlers. The documents showed ownership records and signatures that should never have existed. Tala had overheard conversations among the adults before the storm. Victor Kane's name had been mentioned many times. Their mother had planned to present the evidence soon. Suddenly, everything made sense. The tracks, the search, the visit. The girls had never simply been lost children. They were connected to something much larger. Something dangerous. That night, Ethan stood at the cabin window looking into the darkness beyond the trees. The storm had finally begun to clear. Moonlight reflected across the snow-covered mountains. Then he saw it. Far in the distance. A small line of moving lights. Lanterns. Several riders were traveling through the valley below, and they were heading straight toward the cabin. Ethan did not sleep that night. From the cabin window, he watched the distant lanterns move slowly through the valley. There were too many lights to belong to travelers. The riders were searching for something, and Ethan had little doubt about what that was. By dawn, he had made his decision. The girls could not stay at the cabin any longer. If Victor Kane's men found them, they would not stop until they got what they wanted. After breakfast, Ethan gathered supplies for a long journey. He packed food, blankets, extra ammunition, and medical supplies. Tala understood immediately. "We are leaving." Ethan nodded. "We are going to find your mother." Relief washed across both girls' faces. Within an hour, the three of them were riding deeper into the mountains. The weather had improved, but winter still ruled the high country. Snow covered the trails, and icy winds swept across the ridges. Ethan relied on his knowledge of the terrain, choosing routes that few people knew existed. For 2 days they traveled through forests, narrow passes, and frozen valleys. Along the way, the girls began to trust him completely. Nita laughed more often now. She pointed out animal tracks and asked endless questions about life on a ranch. Even Ethan found himself smiling at times, something he had not done much in years. Tala was quieter. She often studied the horizon as if searching for signs of her family. One evening, while they rested beside a small fire hidden among rocks, Tala spoke about her mother. "Ayana always says fear can make people do terrible things." Ethan stared into the flames. "Your mother sounds wise." Tala smiled. "She says courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right even when fear is present." The words stayed with Ethan. The next afternoon, trouble finally found them. While crossing a frozen valley, Ethan spotted movement behind them. Riders. 5 of them. Closing fast. "Kane's men," Ethan said. Tala looked back and immediately recognized one of the horses. Fear appeared in her eyes. Ethan urged their horses forward. The chase began. Snow flew beneath pounding hooves as they raced through the valley. The riders gained ground steadily. Ethan knew they could not outrun them forever. Ahead stood a narrow canyon cutting between steep rock walls. He led the girls inside. The passage twisted sharply through the mountain. As the riders followed, Ethan noticed a heavy shelf of snow resting above one side of the canyon. An idea formed instantly. He stopped his horse and handed Tala the reins. "Take Nita and keep moving." "What about you?" "I'll catch up." The girls hesitated. "Go." Reluctantly, they obeyed. Ethan climbed a rocky slope overlooking the canyon. As Kane's men entered below, he aimed his rifle high above them. One shot echoed across the mountains. Then another. A deep rumble followed. The snowpack cracked. Within seconds, tons of snow cascaded down the mountainside. The riders shouted in panic. Horses reared as the avalanche thundered into the canyon, blocking the path completely. Ethan quickly retreated and rejoined the girls. For the moment, they were safe. But the escape came at a cost. While scrambling down the rocks, Ethan had slipped and struck his shoulder hard against a ledge. By evening, pain spread through his arm. Still, he pushed forward. The next morning, they climbed a high ridge overlooking a vast stretch of wilderness. Then Tala suddenly gasped. She pointed toward the distance. A thin column of smoke rose into the sky. Not from a cabin. From many campfires. Tears filled her eyes. "It is them," she whispered. For the first time in days, hope replaced fear. Somewhere beyond the ridge, her family was waiting. The journey down the ridge felt longer than any road they had traveled before. As they approached the camp, several Apache scouts emerged from the trees. Their expressions were cautious at first, but the moment they recognized Tala and Nita, everything changed. One scout immediately rode ahead. Within minutes, people began rushing from the camp. Then a woman appeared. The instant Tala saw her, she broke into a run. "Mother!" Nita followed close behind. The woman dropped to her knees and wrapped both daughters in her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she held them tightly. For days, she had feared the worst. Now her children were home. Ethan remained a short distance away, giving the family space. He felt relief settle over him for the first time since finding the girls beneath that pine tree. After a long reunion, the woman approached him. She was Ayana. There was strength in her eyes, but also warmth. "My daughters told me what you did for them," she said. "You gave them shelter, food, and protection." Ethan nodded modestly. "They needed help." Ayana shook her head. "Many people would have turned away. You did not." That evening, Ethan was invited to share a meal with the camp. Around the fires, he listened as families laughed and celebrated the girl's return. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. Later, Ayana asked him to sit beside her near a smaller fire. The mood became serious. She explained that the documents exposing Victor Kane's land theft were real. They contained records proving that he had cheated both Apache families and struggling settlers out of property for years. "He built his power through lies," Ayana said. "And he fears the truth." Ethan understood now why Kane had been so desperate to find the girls. Then Ayana surprised him. "There is something I wish to ask of you." Ethan looked at her. "I am listening." "Our people and many honest settlers want the same thing. We want peace. We want fairness. We want a future where our children do not inherit old divisions." She paused. "But trust is difficult to build." Ethan nodded. He knew that better than most. Ayana continued. "When we bring the evidence against Kane, there will be resistance. People will need someone they trust to stand beside us." Realization slowly dawned on him. "You want my help?" "I do." The request caught him off guard. For years he had lived apart from everyone. He had stopped believing he had anything valuable left to offer. Ayana seemed to read his thoughts. "You saved my daughters when you could have walked away." She looked toward the camp where Tala and Nita sat laughing together. "That tells me exactly who you are." Ethan stared into the fire. The faces of his lost wife and son came to mind. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stirring beneath the grief. Purpose. After a long silence, he finally looked up. "All right," he said. "I will help." Ayana smiled. And together, they began preparing for the fight that would decide the future of the valley. The town meeting was held in the old courthouse, where nearly every seat was filled. Farmers, ranchers, and traders gathered in silence as Ayana stepped forward with the documents in her hands. Ethan stood beside her, steady but quiet, while Victor Kane watched from the front row with a tight jaw. As Ayana read the records aloud, the room slowly changed. Names, signatures, and land claims revealed years of theft and manipulation. Murmurs spread through the crowd. One by one, witnesses stood to confirm the truth. Kane tried to speak, but no one listened anymore. By the end of the session, the decision was clear. Authorities moved to strip Kane of his claims and open a full investigation. Outside, the air felt different. Tala and Nita ran to Ethan and hugged him tightly. Ayana watched them and said softly, "You did not just save my daughters. You helped save our future." For the first time in years, Ethan smiled without pain. And so, from a single act of kindness in the freezing mountains, everything changed. A lonely cowboy who once shut himself away from the world found a new purpose, and two lost girls helped reconnect entire communities that had been divided for years. In the end, it was not strength or power that changed the story, but compassion and courage when it mattered most. Sometimes, one decision can reshape many lives in ways no one expects. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new one. Share this with someone who believes that kindness can still change the world.